Hello and welcome to another standard games video on the official MTG Arena channel. Today we're taking a look at a red-green aggro deck featuring a lot of the modified synergies from Kamigawa, updated with the latest and greatest cards from Phyrexia, and this deck can curve out incredibly nicely, starting with the new Evolving Adaptive, a 1-mana 0/0, enters the battlefield with an oil counter on it, getting +1/+1 for each one of those counters, and then whenever another creature enters under our control that has higher power or toughness than the adaptive picks up an extra counter, so it will scale very nicely over time. Then we also get to play with Kumano, which is one of the best red cards in Standard and has seen a ton of play across different formats, first dealing 1 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker the opponent controls. Then on the following chapter, whenever we cast our next creature spell, it will enter with a +1/+1 counter on it, which also counts as a modification, which has a ton of great synergy throughout the deck, and then eventually turns into a 2/2 with haste that also helps exile opposing creatures if they die, which is also relevant in this Standard, with cards like Siege Veteran giving the opponent 1/1 tokens if their soldiers die, so the etching can also shut that down. Then at 2 mana, the most important creature is the Beastcaller, a 2/2 picking up +1/+1 counters whenever we cast a creature spell, doesn't matter if it's larger or smaller, and then when the Beastcaller dies, we can redistribute all those +1 counters across our creatures. Then I'm also playing 2 copies of the Upriser Renegade, a 1/3 getting +2/+0 for each other modified creature we control. So modifications in our deck include mostly +1 counters, but also oil counters, so just curving Adaptive into Renegade will already give us a 3-powered Renegade, and there's a ton of ways to distribute +1 counters and oil counters throughout the deck to keep growing the Renegade's power. And then we've got 2 copies of the Loyal Bodyguard, a 3/3, so not a bad rate for 2 mana, and can also be sacrificed to give other legendary creatures we control +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. And there's a few legendaries throughout the deck. We've got Kodama, Migloss, and the Partners, so the ability can actually come in handy, but a 3/3 already not bad by itself. And then rounding out to 2-drops, we've got the full set of Kami's Flare as our spot removal of choice, dealing 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker, but if we also control a modified creature, it will deal 2 damage to that permanent's controller. And there's a ton of modified creatures throughout the deck, can even enable Kami's Flare on turn 2, just by playing a turn 1 Adaptive. We already control a modified creature, so we can immediately get the extra damage. And then at 3 mana, one of the greatest additions is a Bloated Contaminator, a 4/4 Trampler with Toxic 1. Don't really care about poison damage here, but whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we get to proliferate, so we can add extra +1 counters and oil counters on our various creatures. Sometimes we have both +1 counters and oil counters on the Adaptive, in which case it will benefit twice from proliferate, so that's incredibly nice as well. Then we've got our 2 copies of Kodama, a 3/3 with Reach, saying modified creatures we control have Trample, which is incredibly relevant, especially once we build up a huge Renegade or Beastcaller, being able to trample over any potential chum blockers. And whenever a modified creature we control deals combat damage to a player, get to search our library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, so it can also help us ramp and thin out our deck, so we're more likely to draw action spells over the top. And then 2 copies of Migloss, our final 3-mana creature, a 4/4 legendary that enters with 5 oil counters on it, so immediately counts as a modified creature, and then we can remove those oil counters in various ways, giving it Vigilance and Menace until end of turn, maybe +2/+2, or even destroy an artifact or enchantment by removing 3 oil counters. And then Invigorating Hot Spring also has great synergy throughout the deck, a 3-mana enchantment that enters with 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and once during our turn we can move one of those +1 counters onto a creature we control, and then modified creatures we control have haste, so we can move counters onto freshly played creatures to not only pump them up, but also give them haste right away. But the modifications also work with oil counters, for instance, so if we play Migloss with a Hot Spring, even if the Hot Spring's already depleted, we can still attack with Migloss right away. And of course, Hot Spring, great alongside our Contaminator, can attack with a 5/5 Trampler and then proliferate not only the counter on Contaminator itself, but also the counters on Hot Spring, so we can keep using the Hot Spring over and over again. And then Hot Spring also curves very nicely into an evolved Spinoderm, a 4-mana 5/5 that enters a battlefield with 4 oil counters on it, so once again counts as a modified creature, and at the beginning of our upkeep we have to remove an oil counter from the Spinoderm. If it has no oil counters left, we have to sacrifice it, and then it has Trample as long as it has 2 or fewer oil counters on it, otherwise it has Hexproof. So it starts out having Hexproof for 2 turns, which is very nice against opposing control decks that rely on spot removal to take out our creatures, and then it will gradually transition into having Trample, which can also be useful to trample past any chum blockers to get the last points of damage in. And then our other 4-drops include Thundering Raiju, which also has great synergy throughout the deck, a 3/3 with haste, and then when it attacks we can put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature we control, and then Raiju deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures we control other than Thundering Raiju, so it can deal a ton of extra damage. And then the partners are also a must-have in this deck, a 2/3 with First Strike and Reach, saying at the beginning of combat on our turn, put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature we control, where X is Halana and Alena's power, and that creature also gains haste until end of turn. So another great way to immediately attack with our creatures while beefing them up, and if we can somehow increase the partner's power, either with a +1 counter from Raiju, Hot Spring, or even Kumano if we play it later, then we can also distribute even more +1 counters throughout the team, so that's also very nice. And then the mana base has a few hidden gems as well, with 2 copies of the Monumental Facade, a land that enters with 2 oil counters on it, and we can tap it, remove an oil counter to put it on one of our creatures. So this can help grow our adaptive, we can potentially activate Migloss an additional time, and we can also keep our Spinoderm alive a little bit longer. But even if it doesn't target a creature that works with oil counters, it could still be helpful by potentially pumping up our Renegade by modifying our creature that otherwise isn't modified. We can also give our creatures Trample with Kodama, and we can also get additional modified creatures for the Raiju, so the Monumental Facade has a ton of great use cases throughout the deck. And then we've got a ton of great mana fixing with our red-green dual lands, including the new Copperline Gorge, which is also great in any red-green aggro deck, and then a couple basics to round things out, and the channel lands offer a tiny bit more interaction. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the play, and our hand seems promising. Adaptive into Renegade, and then hopefully pick up a 3rd land for Migloss. Let's see what we're up against. Turn 1 Forest. Okay, stick to the plan here. And then Migloss will also grow a Renegade, getting +2/+0 for each modified creature. Opponent seems to have a removal spell at the ready, so it'll take out Renegade, although we still grow the adaptive 2 here. And then partners will be a nice curve topper. So Renegade down. Still get in for a healthy 3 damage. And a Shakedown Heavy is next, so our opponent must be on a Fight Rigging deck. So Migloss can destroy artifacts or enchantments, even at instant speed. So if we want to play it safe, we would just hide behind Migloss's ability. But of course then we're not developing our board all that much. Could also use, I guess, the Facade to grow adaptive, so that can attack past the Heavy. And then I guess Migloss also gets to attack. And then if our opponent trades, then we can just take the trade and not have to worry about Fight Rigging. Opponent takes it. Alright. So we'll just pass with 3 mana up. There's a Fight Rigging. And that party's not gonna happen here. So I'll go full control, let them choose a hideaway card first and then destroy it. So now our opponent's gonna be forced to trade away their Shakedown Heavy, so we're not too worried about another Fight Rigging, but let's see how we can win the game here. Can potentially use the last counter from Facade, put it on Migloss, and then both use the +2/+2 and Menace ability, putting the opponent to 1, and then we can finish them off with Kumano. Could also play Bodyguard to make Migloss indestructible, or just slam down the partners. And our opponent sees a writing on the wall and concedes onto the next one. Okay, we're on the play, and our hand seems fine. Tapped Rockfall Veil, turn 2 Bodyguard, turn 3 probably Hot Spring before Kodama, we'll see. And then Hot Spring will give our Spinoderm haste as well. Facing black-white, so it tends to be a more controlling deck. At least Cut Down doesn't kill Bodyguard. Looks like Esper Legends perhaps. Thalia does make our Spring more expensive. So we'll just be playing Kodama here. And then Bodyguard can also protect Kodama. Can at least attack past the 2-1 first strike. So still in favor of Hot Spring before Spinoderm. Can also give one of our creatures Trample and search up a land with Kodama. Could see Rafine to grow Thalia, attack past Kodama, yep. But at least Kodama can turn into a large blocker for Rafine, or just attack past it as well, we'll see. Could also block Thalia, sacrifice Bodyguard, which I don't hate. And then next turn, Hot Spring, counter on Kodama, attack past Rafine. Or we can just kind of turn this into a racing situation. I think we'll just take it. Kami's Flare. Could kill Thalia here, but Hot Spring seems better. And then, what makes more sense? I guess counter on Bodyguard, attack with it, and then I can sacrifice Bodyguard to give Kodama 1 extra power and indestructible on defense. So it can maybe hold off one of the opponent's creatures here. So opponent takes it, find a forest. And then next turn we're maybe looking at a hasty Spinoderm. Because yeah, Bodyguard also gives +1 power in addition to indestructible, which could be relevant here. Opponent is attacking. So if I intend to use Bodyguard to make Kodama indestructible, I have to do it before blocks to play around Eiganjo. Of course I could have another Soaring City as well, which punishes me for indestructible before blocking. But I think I'm down to sack Bodyguard, make Kodama indestructible, block Thalia. Alternatively we can just take 6 and then attack back for a bunch next turn, which I also don't mind. Yeah, let's just take it. Still won't be able to both Kami's Flare and Spinoderm here. Opponent had a Brutal Cathar. Goes after Bodyguard. And Adaptive the draw. So now I could go Adaptive, Kami's Flare, Cathar. Get Bodyguard back, grow Adaptive. Counter on Bodyguard, since Adaptive already has haste, and we can even put an extra counter on it with Facade, as opposed to Adaptive into Spinoderm, and then Adaptive we could potentially grow once again, or grow Kodama. And that's also pretty powerful, but then we have to be careful that we don't die on the way back. Whereas here we are attacking for how much? 8, 9, 10, 11, so it's not quite lethal. Yeah, I think I prefer Adaptive, Kami's Flare, and use Facade. And I think we actually have just enough here between the damage from Kami's Flare and the extra counter from Facade. And attack for 10. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, and our hand seems keepable. Could use a 2-mana creature to get the +1 counter from Kumano, but we're still looking at Hot Spring potentially giving our Contaminator haste, and then the Proliferate also very good with Hot Spring, so we keep getting more counters on it. So ideally find our Renegade or our Beastcaller here. I guess a 1-mana Adaptive alongside another Kumano would also be great. So we have a couple outs. Opponent on blue-white soldiers. Just to land the draw. Okay, play another Kumano. And then we'll have to decide next turn whether we want to Hot Spring first or Contaminator. For opponent plays Thalia, we don't have a choice. Can even Proliferate or Sagas with the Contaminator, doesn't come up very often. So opponent keeps up 2 mana, presumably for reinforcements. So, could play Contaminator, could play around Gruul Cathar a little bit better by playing the Hot Spring first. And then counter on Etching means they also cannot trade for reinforcements, not that they were necessarily planning to. Okay, so the race is on. No reinforcements end of turn. Do we see turn 3 Cathar? Just a Siege Veteran. Okay. And we can easily turn this into a race. Just gotta hope we draw some non-land cards. So for now, play Contaminator, put a counter on it, and smash. And then we'll have a 4/4 Etching left over. Opponent's just gonna take it. Okay. So assuming they can remove Contaminator, we will probably still need to draw a creature here to cross the finish line. Okay, there's a Cathar. And not having any plays and letting the Cathar transform could also be bad. So really need a non-land card here off the top. Okay, Spinoderm was a good one. So Spinoderm and then counter on Etching. Spinoderm already has haste. And that's the power of Hot Spring in this deck. Don't want to draw too many copies, but if you can draw one exactly, it's incredibly powerful. So now our opponent's going to have to make some trades or chump blocks. Ooh, opponent had a Loran's Escape as a trick. Don't see that one very often. So they actually saved Cathar. Fair enough. But as we mentioned, no 1/1 tokens since we exiled with Etching. Opponent forced to play out Soaring City, so they really needed that extra mana. And a Sky Strike. Okay, so opponent will be able to pull ahead now with a card advantage. So we better close out the game quickly here. And a land is not what we needed. Maybe counter on Spinoderm is still slightly better, because I have to block with Brutal Cathar and I get my Contaminator back. I'm happy I don't need Etching to survive that. Whereas a double block from Veteran and Officer on a 5/5 I would rather avoid. Opponent will get to draw a card on the way out, but at least we have them on the back foot. Okay, 2 chump blocks. Opponent did not even draw with Officer, so they might have given up here. Ideally we keep a counter on the Hot Spring to proliferate with Contaminator, but this game might be decided before that matters. Officer attacks, makes a 1/1. And our opponent explodes. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. Sadly, no creatures in our hand. I don't think we can keep. This is better. So we're keeping Adaptive into Beastcaller, and then don't have double red for Raiju, so Partner seems a bit safer here. Turn 1 Swamp from our opponent, no cut down, could see it go for the throat next turn. And we're hoping to pick up a 3-drop. Kumano still reasonable here. Okay, so we'll attack. And likely see removal. And then Partners picking up a +1 counter from the Saga also means we get to distribute an extra counter onto Beastcaller. So we can attack past the Trespasser, no problem. Miglo's also decent. And then now Partners also survive Cut Down, which they didn't have on turn 1, but they could have drawn in the meantime. Gonna be a life of Toshiro. Just gaining some life. That's not too bad. And then now Kodama could give the team Trample. Miglos could destroy enchantments, but don't have the mana for it. So Kodama seems to have higher upside here. And then we'll give Kodama haste, why not? And smash. And our opponent's just dead here. Get to search up some lands as well if we want to, but there we have it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, and our hand seems fine. I guess we do have 2 Rockfall Veils, so one of those will be tapped on turn 2 potentially. So I might go Kumano into another Kumano into Renegade. Although the upside's quite high if we find another untapped land here to just curve 1, 2, 3. So I'm gonna go for it. Alright, there we go. So turn 2 Renegade, and then we have a creature with a counter on it. We can also use the Facade to potentially modify the etching to get an extra land with Kodama and gain Trample. And I'm just gonna tap out for Kodama here. That seems to work. Get to find an extra land. And then now we're hoping to pick up some of our more expensive cards. Opponent on a Mardu deck with a Fable, that's fine. Another Facade. Well, at the very least we can modify all our creatures here and grow the Renegade in the process. So let's smash. Opponent's just taking it down to 4. So there may be a sweeper incoming. At least we thinned out our deck nicely. Opponent potentially needed the extra mana from the Shaman token to set up their next play. So yeah, even if the oil counter doesn't really do any oil counter synergies, it could still be useful with the Renegade and with Kodama. Okay, so opponent a 4-color deck. Does not seem like they discarded something big to reanimate. So at this point, hoping to find some of our haste creatures. Kami's Flare could be good. Okay, our opponent passes, keeps the Shaman back, and we top-decked Kami's Flare. So let's give that a try. A Braid kills Kodama, so no Trample. Still have modified creatures aplenty. And let's attack all out. Alright, sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, and our hand could use a 2-drop and a 3rd land. I think overall it's still a keep. Okay, so our curve is getting quite high here, which could be an issue. Still gonna play turn 1 Kumano, even though we don't have a 2-drop lined up. The upside's quite high if we do. At least we found our 3rd land. Sadly, we'll have to miss out on that modified synergy. So we'll attack and then play Contaminator over Kodama. Can maybe play Kodama after playing Spinoderm. Opponent blue-red with Facade could point towards a Mind Splice Apparatus deck. Syncopates also makes sense in that build. So yeah, not having a more aggressive start is unfortunate. Can play Raiju now, or Spinoderm. If our opponent taps out for Mind Splice here, at least Spinoderm is more likely to survive. So, attack for 2, play Spinoderm. Seems fine by me. And if they counter here, at least they're not putting a Mind Splice in play. Spinoderm also survives a Brotherhood's End, which might be their sweeper of choice. Alright, opponent's gonna Deluge in response. Also taking one of Shivan Reef could be a factor in this game. Burn down the house could still kill our Spinoderm here. But that's about it. Alright, so we get to untap with it. And we can double spell Beastcaller Bodyguard. Or we can play Kodama to get an extra land with the Spinoderm, but it's not the most mana efficient play. A Raiju also an option, although I kind of prefer Raiju as a follow-up to a sweeper. So Beastcaller plus Bodyguard makes sense. No reason to play those main phase. So let's attack. Opponent with a Fires kicked on the etching. Okay. So yeah, Beastcaller plus Bodyguard. Sadly, Bodyguard cannot make any of our creatures indestructible. So now burn down the house would be painful. Brotherhood's Ends, that one's still manageable. And another one. Alright, so our opponent did wipe the board, but they're at 6. So now the coast is clear for Raiju to get in. Do we prefer that over anything else? I think so. Put our opponent to 2. And they have to answer our Raiju. And those pain lands are getting quite painful. Another Fires is a good one. So yeah, Crucible channeled. I would do it here. Although I wonder if I should just play Contaminator and then channel it next turn. If I pick up another land, I could also play Kodama and channel in the same turn, since it's discounted by our legendary. By not presenting lethal, I do give them the chance to put a Mind Splice in play, and our opponent is also playing white for the Twilight potentially to gain life back. So maybe I should just channel. Also plays around a counterspell, which could be the only interaction they have. And our opponent explodes. Awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, and our hand is not perfect, but keepable. Can play turn 2 Kumano, and turn 3 Contaminator will enter with a +1 counter. But we might draw some creatures that change our course of action. Kumano could also be nice with the partners, putting an extra +1 counter on it. But we'll see. Opponent on soldiers. Okay, play Kumano, and then at least I've got a Kami's Flare for a Brutal Cathar. And then hopefully the partners can take over. Soldiers not known to have a ton of removal. Turn to Thalia, okay, that's fine. So we'll find out if they have a Cathar soon here. Otherwise, Contaminator proliferating could also be quite powerful. Still a chance they have an Eiganjo as interaction to combine with the first strike from Thalia. So maybe that's what they're holding on to. So if that's the case, if I put 2 counters on it with partners, goes up to 7/7, they would no longer be able to take it out. Don't have to worry about any counter spells since our lands are all courtyards. If we weren't playing around Eiganjo, then putting counters on etching to attack with it would also make sense to kind of spread out the wealth a little bit more. Alright, just the reinforcements, that's fine. They can reset all those +1 counters with a Cathar, but if they had one, we probably would have seen it last turn. Okay, Harbin's fine. Also don't have to worry about a Wandering Emperor because of the opponent's own Thalia. And I guess the courtyard's also unable to cast Emperor anyway. So yeah, maybe going Beast Caller and then Kami's Flare is still better. So play Beast Caller, give it haste. And then we'll wait and see how our opponent blocks before casting the Kami's Flare. We are attacking for lethal. So at the very least we're gonna have to chump the Beast Caller. Another option is just killing Thalia right away, so Etching can also attack, which is certainly reasonable. Just another reinforcements. So now Harbin's the bigger problem card that we're going to want to take out. So opponent chumps, takes 8. Now let's make sure Harbin dies. So opponent's now at 2. Get to proliferate some more counters. And our opponent's very far behind. And our opponent explodes. Awesome. Get to rank up here as well. So yeah, we get to see our red-green aggro deck in action, and it can certainly deliver the beatdowns, getting to curve out with some of the best creatures and enchantments in Standard. Hot Spring was also quite impressive when we got to see it in action, so there's still a few flex slots. You can mess with some of the numbers, especially the 4-drops. You can play any number of partners, Raiju or Spinoderm, but the Spinoderm alongside Hot Spring especially is quite nice. So that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.